Hi, and welcome to the Marginally Compelling podcast. I am your host, Matt Shapiro, and today I'm going to be talking to Carol Roth. I've been following her on Twitter for a very, very long time, and she's always been a really interesting sort of like moderate, maybe center-right voice, but that's really not important to what we're going to be talking about today, which is her new book, You Will Own Nothing. So, Carol, welcome. Would you like to introduce yourself a little bit?
Yeah, no, first of all, it's so great to be with you and the Twitter love right back. I have also been following you forever and find the common sense voice very refreshing. So appreciate the work that you're doing. I think your Twitter handle is polymath, right?
Yes.
And I kind of feel like I'm the same thing, sort of a Renaissance woman who has my hands in a lot of things. But the short bio is that I am a recovering investment banker. I'm an entrepreneur. I play myself on TV. I've written a number of books, the latest being You Will Own Nothing. And I even have my own action figure, which you can kind of see behind me next to the book over there. So I've got my hands on a lot of things. Oh, I'm also an investor and sit on boards and do speaking and all that. So as I said, a lot of things. I'm a collector of experiences. And I think we'll probably talk about later one of the entrepreneurial projects. I've now created software, even though I'm not the one that has created it.
Yeah, but it's software is always one of those funny things to create because you end up with the people who you're like do the work, but then often the work runs like if they do it themselves, it'll stall. I've met people who had fully formed products that had no users because they had no idea how to market it and were not interested in learning. Software is a funny place because
every entrepreneur, everybody wants to be an entrepreneur, but nobody wants to be a marketer. And unfortunately, in 2023, those things go hand in hand.
Indeed. I am curious, what goes into having your own action figure? What sort of a process is that?
So one of the many things I do, I'm a sort of like an OG chief customer officer, and I play that role for a collectible toy company. I've been doing it for about 17 or 18 years now, and was really sort of a pioneer in taking the monetization of community and really turning marketing into a profit center. So because my client produces collectible fashion dolls / action figures, when I did my first book, I went to them and said, hey, I'll pay for it. Like, these guys don't have to pay for it, but could I get one of these? Can you guys make me one of these for my book launch? And they were like, yeah, sure. We'd be happy to do it. Something that probably wouldn't be able to happen today from a cost standpoint and just a factory standpoint, supply chain, and all these things. But back when I did that, it was a thing. And I actually used it as a promo because for my first book cover, the publisher decided to put me on the cover. And there was like huge backlash from the big retailers. They used to be book retailers before that you would actually like go into a store, and like the big ones, I think it was Barnes and Noble, was like, oh, she's too attractive to be taken seriously as a business author, so you have to ugly her up or pull her off the cover. That's a really wonderful funny publisher, and he's like, well, I'm gonna kind of leave it up to you. I'm like, I'm not doing that, and wait till you see the premium I'm going to do as a big FU. So that's kind of what went into that. But as I tell people, they always say, how do I get one of those? And I say, you don't, and that's what makes it so cool.
Right. Indeed. But okay, so let's talk about You Will Own Nothing. What's the premise? Where did this come from, and why did you decide there needed to be a book about the disappearance of ownership?
So the first time I heard You Will Own Nothing was on social media, probably Twitter, since that's where I spend most of my time. And people were talking about the top 8 predictions for 2030 coming from the World Economic Forum. And their number one prediction is you'll own nothing and you'll be happy. And I'm like, the World Economic Forum, it's this big organization. It's littered with the political and business elite. Like, there's no way that they're predicting the end of private property in just a few years. Like, there must have been some context that was missing here. And so I did very little research and found out No, that's actually what they were saying. And by the way, it was not the first time they had said it. They had sort of been repackaging this idea of communal ownership and kind of a lot of, Marxist and communist ideas versus, traditional capitalism and private property. And I thought that's weird. But more than being weird, it was very nefarious to me because as somebody who has helped people, with wealth creation in the media and whatnot for a very long time, and in my prior life as a recovering investment banker, I know that to create wealth, you need ownership. Like that's where it comes from. You own assets that have the opportunity to either retain their value or hopefully appreciate in value over time. And that's what makes people wealthy versus just earning an income. And so the idea that you have people predicting the end of ownership means that you don't have these wealth creation opportunities, and they're selling it as you'll be happy, like trying to get you to buy into this. And I'm not the biggest student of history, but I know that over time, in history, when people didn't have ownership, they were not free and they weren't very happy.
It's interesting because in the time that I've been in software, we have moved very substantially from the idea of software as something you purchase and own to software as a service. And almost all software now is sold as a service. And part of that is that software, like in order to maintain the highest levels of security and usability, it needs to be constantly updated. And in order to update it, you need to spend money in order to. So a lot of software has moved to service-based software where you pay month by month. But it's been an interesting journey because, well, let's just talk about music. When the iPod became a thing, right? You would either rip a CD that you physically owned and you would put that onto your iPod, or you would buy a digital copy from Apple. Now, aside from the really sketchy licensing stuff that Apple does, the idea that the consumer had was that they owned that thing. That's their idea of how
perception,
right, was that they owned it. And at one point, Microsoft tried to make a stab into that world. They created their own music player.
Zune, right?
Zune, exactly. I've got one.
Amazing.
But the idea that they had was so revolutionary that people didn't like it. And it was that when you get the Zune, you'll pay the subscription and you can download everything. Like they basically their pitch was, we have this 50 gigabyte music player and you can fill it with music on day one for only $15 a month. And it was mocked mercilessly by people in the tech world, and ultimately Zune struggled along for a number of years and eventually folded. But that's the vision. That Microsoft was just too far ahead of things for people to jump on that, and people hated Microsoft, so that didn't help either. But that was their idea, was that, like, okay, you start and you have everything. If you stop paying, you have nothing.
It's pretty staggering. And it's funny as you kind of look at tech as one entity, but also kind of all these other things that are coming at us, the shift in global financial landscape, what the Fed and government policy has done to the dollar, social credit, ESG, the possibility for central bank digital currencies, Wall Street coming to compete with you to buy a home, all these different areas were lining up for me as things that I wanted to talk about. And then it just kind of hit me that they were all under this same wrapper of you will own nothing. And so I did sort of segment it into this like financial war that you have with three different forces, the Fed and the government being one, these what I call the bad actors, the NGOs of the world, the WEF, as well as, like the UN and big business and whatnot. And then big tech stands on its own because it really does have its own set of ownership issues. And I agree with you. There are times when not owning things makes a lot of sense.
Right.
But there are times when it doesn't, and it creates a whole slew of problems for us, particularly when there isn't competition. You think of something like operating systems. I own multiple phones because I'm just a crazy person, but I've got a couple of these things. And, what is it that I actually have paid for? I've got glass, I have some microchips, some plastic, but that's really the only thing I own. And it's sort of useless to me if I don't have an operating system, let alone access to my emails, let alone access to payment systems, to town squares and whatnot. In the case of the phones, there are two operating systems that dominate more than 99% of not just the US, but the planet. Mm-hmm. So that's not a place where there's this free market competition. That's infrastructure, which mm-hmm. makes it a very different scenario than having something with a lot of free market competition, a lot of options, and the option to own things and the option not to. They become gatekeepers. They've actually, in many cases, become a de facto government. And that's, really becomes the issue in terms of ownership. You might not want to own every piece of software. You might not even want to own music, but in some cases you might, because as you know, you may want to trade it with someone, or you may want to listen to a whole album and now you're only getting a little piece of something. And just the training of people to get away from ownership because of the digitization of so many of these items transfers over to bigger assets. It's starting to transfer over to cars. It's transferring over to homes. Certainly some skepticism over other types of investments. And at the end of the day, it's certainly your choice. And it's okay if you make that choice. But when it's brought to you by mandate or that access is limited, that's where we have the problem. And I think that's the direction, unfortunately, that we're moving toward.
Yeah, I think the inability to own things, especially in the digital world, is extremely fraught. In particular, so there's a journalist whose political views and mine align almost not at all. Her name is Quinn Norton, but I have enormous respect for her because someone tried to cancel her and became very successful at canceling her because she was once a friend with a man who ended up becoming sort of a neo-Nazi. And she has always sort of maintained friendly relationship with him, even while denouncing the stuff he says.
Sure.
And someone basically said, like, you have to denounce him personally or we're going to cancel you. And she said, F off. No, absolutely. Right. You cannot blackmail me into doing that. Well, one of the consequences of that was that someone had her Google account essentially canceled from underneath her. Everything attached to that Google account gone. And if she had a phone, if she was on Android and had a phone attached to that Google account, everything, every purchase, every app, her phone becomes unusable if it doesn't have an underlying account attached to it. And so the sort of, I mean, like you said, with infrastructure, I think the infrastructure question is incredibly important. I think I think our laws are way far behind on this sort of thing where people should have a right to banking. People should have a right to communication. And I don't think there's really a precedent for like Bell South or, the Bell Labs, AT&T.
There is a precedent. It's in the opposite direction. So I actually cover this in the book. And there's a law that was put in place for the phone carriers saying that you must provide service. The fact that you are infrastructure and you have the benefit of having these handful of licenses, mm-hmm. that even if it's not financially viable, like it's some dude out, in the middle of nowhere who wants phone service, that you are required by law to provide them with phone service. And, there certainly isn't, I'm sure this is where you were going, a precedent of you and I having a phone conversation and them going, hey, I don't like what you guys are talking about. So or I just don't like you personally, mm-hmm. you eat too much meat and I'm vegetarian. So I'm going to cancel you off the phone because there's a law in place to protect that. And I am, as a kind of libertarian-ish, free rights person, I'm not one that likes a lot of laws, but the purpose of the law, the place where the government's, what they're actually supposed to do is protect your individual rights and your property rights. Infrastructure is part of that. And if you cannot participate in society as a modern human, that's a big issue. And I did talk, do you know Ron Coleman by any chance?
I know the name.
Twitter?
Yeah.
He's a really great attorney. He's a big free speech advocate. He's the one who defended the ban the slants in front of the Supreme Court and won that
Okay.
case when they tried to take away their trademark and saying, oh, it was
Yeah, yeah.
disparaging. And so he's quoted in the book. And his philosophy, which I thought was so smart, was like, we all would prefer for tech to just come up with some sort of digital bill of rights themselves and for
Right.
us, to do this voluntarily. But in the absence of that, like, we're going to get the law wrong to begin with. But we have to start somewhere to make the tweaks and the modifications. We can't just sit around and wait for the perfect law because it's going to continually evolve. And this is one place where I do think that absent these companies stepping up, and I understand why they don't want to do it because it's to their benefit not to do it. But long term, it would make sense to have these companies do it. But obviously, I mean, we're sitting here talking to time when Meta has just launched Threads and they're already censoring on that platform like they do on their other platforms. So the idea that they're going to all of a sudden stand up and do the right thing and create this protection is probably not going to happen. And that's where we need the laws to step in, which is frightening on the other hand, because if you look at the people in Congress, it's a total clown show. And if you've ever heard them do any sort of technology hearing, they obviously have no idea what's going on. They're like, oh, have you been on the interwebs? These kids, this is thing. It's embarrassing.
It's very funny because I'm part of a secret group where we're basically like technologists who are skeptical of technology policy. And so it's like, well, you'll get like government groups that are like, we're really skeptical of this company, and we're like, yeah, go. And then they're like, we think it works this way, and we're like, oh no. No, like you're right to be skeptical, but you have no idea what's going on, and you don't know why you should be skeptical. You're just skeptical of stuff.
So here's what I would offer up. What would be great is if your secret group maybe came up with something and we started populating and we get, broad, kind of grassroots building of something that then we can take to some of these people who aren't so clever but are good at being politicians, and they can just pass it off as their own. Like, we don't care, we don't need the credit, but at least then we know that they're starting from the correct parameters. I wanted to mention one other thing, that when you were talking about the journalists that you don't have the same ideas with, I actually talked in the book about a journalist that I don't share ideals with, but he's a tech journalist named Farhad Manjoo. Okay. I don't know if you know him. He's written for a lot of the big outlets, and he wrote, one of the issues with where technology has gone. Like, it used to be that technology was very democratized and it allowed everyone to kind of participate in things. But now you get to the point where there's just a handful of companies who are basically collecting rent on everything. So they're putting up a barrier, and either they're the only companies there, or if anybody wants to do anything, they're still collecting the rent, right? If you have the Apple Store, or if you want to advertise your small business on Facebook or Google, it's like the same 5 companies who are basically, again, the infrastructure, who are collecting fees, and they're benefiting at everybody's expense.
Right. Well, and that has certain free speech implications as well, because with the Apple Store, and I believe with the Android Store too, although it's less of a thing. If Apple doesn't like what your app does, what's inside of it and what it says, they can basically say you are not allowed to participate in the digital the digital economy, period. Right. Just
you're calling that speech, but I'm also calling that economic freedom. That's the way that you earn a living, and that's your ability to generate the dollars that you can use to create wealth.
Right. If Apple suddenly decided that no one should be allowed to read the Bible, they could turn off the Bible. Right.
It's true.
And millions, hundreds of millions of people use Bible apps to do stuff. And there's no sort of guarantee that those applications are going to be able to continue to be used.
That they won't be changed and censored along the way. I mean, that's the other problem with the digital. We've seen this with books recently, where it's one of the things when I say, go buy, you will owe nothing, buy a hard copy, get in the habit, because this needs to be a record, because somebody's going to come along at some point in the future and they're going to want to change this. And this is going to be a totally who knows what they're going to put in the middle of that book. So we have no idea.
It's funny because I have this right at hand. The Friends Connection was censored on Amazon Prime, or the Amazon streaming version of the Friends Connection was censored to remove things that they felt were inappropriate. we're objectionable. And so I don't love The French Connection. It's a fine film. I'm a little bit young for it, but I am an extremely strong supporter of the originality of art.
Right.
And I really very much dislike anyone who says, well, you can't look at that piece of art. You can't read that book. You can't see that movie because it's too offensive.
And it changes the historical record too, right? Like, we don't know what was happening at that period of time because they've sanitized it based on what some small subset of people felt was objectionable today.
And that, interestingly enough, has been Whoopi Goldberg's argument for decades, is that she has always been against the censorship, especially of early cartoons, because early cartoons are filled with caricatures.
Yeah.
But she believes that there's absolutely no way to sit down and look the reality of American racial politics square in the eye unless you can see how Black people were, again, Indian Americans are well, Indian Americans, yes, but also Native Americans, right? Right. How they were all caricatured in the 20s, 30s, 40s.
Right.
I think that is a really interesting, it's a really important component of the concept of physical ownership, and ownership. I think generally speaking, yes, but I'm a big proponent of having physical things.
Absolutely. I mean, and that's actually one of the main pieces of the book. And it's not just about having stuff. It's really about having these assets, these key things that will allow you to be able to grow your wealth, whether that is a business, stock ownership, physical gold. I know some people like cryptocurrency. It's not my thing, but I understand the reason behind it. Whatever real estate, land, water, like whatever it is, these things are really important. One other thing that made me think of as you were talking about the cancellation as a piece of this whole you own nothing puzzle really is cancel culture as this soft stepping stone to formalize social credit. And if you think about the implications of that from a financial standpoint, what were they doing when they were trying to not only limit her speech, but also limit her financial opportunities? That if you say somebody is a bad person, it's their social standing. You're trying to cancel their future opportunities, their ability to have access to people who might want to hire them in the future. It might be their job, which is their actual income stream. And then in some cases, we see it going after the actual assets. We saw this during COVID, right? If you didn't want to take a vaccine, you were a bad person. You couldn't go into a restaurant. In some cases, you were fired from your job. In some cases, if you had a small business, it was actually taken from you for some period of time and shut down. And then up in Canada, if you were part of the Freedom Convoy, these truckers, they actually seized their bank accounts.
Right.
So this is the physical manifestation of cancel culture into social credit, where it's not just about, saying, oh, you can't say this. It's about then the financial implications that go along with this wrong thing. And one of the scary things that's coming up that I alluded to in the beginning is this concept of central bank digital currencies, where the Fed and the government want to take complete control over currencies. The idea, I'm sure you and your audience probably understand, but would be to have like a physical dollar with a microchip in it, the proxy for it digitally. So if you were going in and you had a dollar and you were trying to spend it and somebody clicked on the microchip and the Fed said, oh, I'm sorry, you ate too many burgers this month. Burgers are bad for the environment, so we're going to cut that off. Or if they said, hey, we're trying to control inflation, so we're just going to cut off access to half of everybody's money because we don't want you to spend it. That level of control is frightening. And it's why cryptocurrency has become a thing, because so many people want more decentralization in the money. But if you think about pairing that up with social credit, now we can, not only just do because you bought a burger, but maybe you posted something online or you're friends with the neo-Nazi or whatnot, and we're just going to cancel access to your money. Right. And in China, they're getting much, much closer. They have a much more formalized social credit system at the state level than we do, but we're starting to move in that direction, and that cancel culture, allowing people to get away with this, is that stepping stone towards allowing that to say you owe nothing. A CBDC just allows further enforcement of that.
Right. No, it's interesting because I did a review of a book by Dr. Richard Horton, who's editor of the Lancet, and he wrote it at the end of 2020, and it was about the COVID. It's about, he called it the COVID catastrophe. And one of the things that he writes about in his book, and he's not even shy about it, which I found a little disturbing, was that this is actually like, yeah, it's bad, people are dying and everything, but it's actually a good thing because people will learn to rely more on the WHO and national and international public health. And as we move forward, they'll give us more money to pull these levers to essentially turn people on and off, depending on whether or not they're following the science that we have told them to follow from these places of monstrous power. Right. And in his mind, that's exactly where we were headed towards the end of 2020. I feel like we might have pulled back from it. But one of the things that I'm doing fairly nonstop is advocating and saying they're still trying to do this. They're still aiming this direction. If you do not stop them, they're going to keep going. And you're not going to see it until the next catastrophe happens. But they're definitely laying the groundwork for this sort of thing.
Yeah, I think that the biggest surprise to me in all of COVID were the number of people who went along with it and didn't push back on any element and said it was okay. I mean, they were very clever about it, right? Because I actually wrote about this in my last book, The War on Small Business, but they were clever. They didn't actually shut down the entire economy. They shut down a third of it. And that primarily impacted small businesses that didn't have cloud connections. If you couldn't go to the grocery store, if you couldn't get your Amazon delivery, if all of the big companies were shut down and they didn't come in to support Wall Street, this would not have lasted for 2 weeks. It just wouldn't have been a thing. But because the big inside players weren't impacted, then everybody else was cannon fodder. It didn't matter, right? Like just throw them out in front. And the fact that people not only like went along with it, but in many cases enthusiastically, let me turn in my neighbor because they didn't they faked their vaccine card, or the person who hacked the Freedom Convoy's GoFundMe and like listed all the donors to it. Like, there were people who were literally like aiding and abetting the state. And so the idea, if you're somebody, as we have these kind of changing financial stakes going on in the background, which we haven't even really talked about, but the financial stakes really are changing, and you're trying to keep yourself in the positions of power and wealth, and you see that you have all these useful idiots that will go along and whatever you advocate, you'll say it's for their good. That gives you a lot of confidence that whatever insane central planning thing you want to put out there, that people are going to accept that. And the idea that you have these people who are doing this for the good of society is hilarious. It's just ridiculous.
Well, it is funny. This is a little bit off topic, but it's funny that one of the things that I've said a couple of times about COVID is like, COVID was your once in a lifetime opportunity to show exactly who you were, and everybody did.
Yeah.
Right. Whether or not you thought, if you like there, and I don't want to go, I'm not going to go the Nazi route. So let's talk Soviet Union. We found out exactly who was going to turn people into the Stasi. Like exactly. I know exactly who they are now, because that's what they did. Right. They would either do it by literally turning people into a government agency, or they would go on their own initiative, try to cancel that person to their employer or to their church or to their friends. And the amazing thing is that it's sort of like it made Judas Iscariot look like a really good negotiator, that he got 30 pieces of silver for turning in Jesus, because these people did it for nothing. They did it for fun.
Wait, they got an emoji that they could put in their bio. They could do put a sign in their front yard, maybe wear a t-shirt that they were a good person. I mean, that's some great swag there, right?
Right. No, it was anyway. Okay, so we're gonna switch things around a little bit. One of the things that I actually wrote a piece a while back about the concept of owning nothing, and that piece was centered around a physical object that I own, something that's been passed down from generation to generation. I think it was given to my grandmother by her great uncle, who made it. It's a breadboard, and it's got a little lip, and you can put it, and it's for kneading and making bread on something that you can take up off the counter, you can clean it, you can put it on a table. But it's now over 100 years old, and it's very much a family heirloom. And one of the most important things that happened with this particular thing is it was given to me before my grandmother died, because she knew that I loved baking, and so she's like, oh, you know what? He's going to have this. And if she hadn't done that, then it would be sitting there in her apartment after she passed, and we would have no idea what she wanted to have done with it. And she was never the sort of person who would have thought, this is such an important thing, it needs to be in my will. I need to give explicit instructions. And she spent the last 3 years of her life maybe giving stuff, like methodically giving stuff away, because she didn't have any idea how else to go about it, right? You don't want to have to write everything into a legal document. But that makes me think a lot about like what's going to happen to me. Like if I've got a heart defect and I pass away tomorrow, I have almost no information about what's happening with any of my stuff. And interestingly, that's part of the reason why I like physical objects, because they create a legacy, they have memories that are attached to them. But there's always the question of how we pass things on. And so this is actually how our recent connection became about, because I was talking about how we pass things along from generation to generation. And you have something to say about that.
Yeah, it was funny. So about 25 people, I think, tagged me on that tweet because I have, unfortunately, a ton of experience with people passing away. Going back to my boyfriend was killed in a car accident when I was in college. My mom passed away the day after her 51st birthday, my stepmother. But then it gets to my dad, and my dad was, not only my best friend, but sort of my financial rock. He had no formal education, but he was just one of those very, kind of savvy, street smart kind of people. Mm-hmm. And he created something for my sister and I that we jokingly referred to as the death file, with like literally every piece of information that you could possibly want about his wishes, where we could find things, where he had hidden things, who we needed to call, all this stuff. And we're just like, Dad, come on. Even though we had been through this multiple times, you think it would be, at that point, we'd go, yeah, we need all this information, but we're like, you're going to live a long time. It's fine. And in 2013, my dad was in a freak accident and he ended up incapacitated. Crazy enough, in putting the stuff together, we'd actually sat down probably a year before and talked about the exact scenario and said, if this were to happen, what do you want us to do? And he's kind of like, do whatever you want. I'm like, no. Don't put that on me. What do you want us to do? And so at first he said, well, keep me on life support forever. And I'm like, really? That's what you want? He's like, no, not really. Get multiple opinions. And if they can't do anything, then you should take me off life support. Yeah. So they tried to save him when he was incapacitated. They couldn't. And we got to this point in time and they said, what do you want to do? And we said, well, we need another opinion. We got the opinions. They said, there's nothing to do. And we made that decision. And because we had gone through this planning thing and I had pulled out the file and I had, all this information, it not only, the most important thing is it saved my sister and I a lifetime of burden. Like, I don't have to sit around and go, did I make the right decision? Maybe they could have saved him, like something that just haunts me every day. Have absolutely no qualms about that. The burial, if you've never been through a burial or a cremation or the disposal of a body, it's a very expensive endeavor. And so going through what my dad wanted, that saved us more than $10,000, which is very meaningful to us. And then the fact that he not only told us, here's the stuff and here's what you should do with it and here's who it's going to, but where we could find everything. I'm not joking when I say it saved us more than 100 hours of time. Like it could be like literally even more than that. So we looked at all these benefits and we're like, oh my God, thank you, Dad. there were some things that he missed, but he got us 85% of the way there. And so we decided to productize this, and we created two form factors: a physical file version and a software version of something called Future File, which you and I are engaging on right now.
Yep.
Just really, as a mission-based endeavor to help other people with what it is that we went through. And the stories coming back to the ownership are so funny because we'll do like a seminar at a church, and one of the things that we'll hear is that these families always fight when somebody passes away. There's so much grief, there's so much drama going on, the stakes are really high. And they're like, it's never really about like the big things. It's always about who gets grandma's blue bowl. So the fact that you're talking about I literally had people say that to me. It's like some little thing that people have the sentimental attachment that the person didn't think to go, oh, okay, I want to give this to someone, or to even pre-give it to them, which actually makes sense both from a monetary standpoint, that helps with your financial planning, something I talk about in You Will Owe Nothing, because there's some big implications with potential wealth taxes and inheritance taxes and whatnot that are coming down the pike. But just some of the important things and what you want to have done with it. And it's also just, depending on how much stuff a person has, like it is a headache too. And hey, is this something that was important or was valuable, or do I need to think about it? It's a really big thing. And as people of our generation are dealing with these things with aging parents, we wanted to create something that was for incapacitation, emergencies, aging parents, or death. And it kind of provides that level of care, because as I know, it can happen at any time. I saw it happen to somebody who was 21 years old, 51 years old, 50 something else, 70s. You just don't know. And once you're in that situation, it's too late to really get the full benefits out of it.
Right. Well, it's interesting because I have become sort of my father's digital caretaker. He passed away 4 or 5 years ago. And I went through, he literally had a stack of hard drives there were like 13 of them. And I just methodically went through, plugged the hard drive in. Is this a duplicate of stuff I already have? What do I do with it? Grab new data, put it out. Okay, next hard drive, one by one, go through everything.
And what's so important about that is that we actually, this was something my dad didn't do, but we included it in Future File, is there's stuff you don't want people in your family to see. And now that we have everything on our phones or in Dropbox or OneDrive or whatnot, you have that opportunity to let people stumble into things that are very private because you're trying to do the right thing. So saying something like, please don't look at my pictures, because like that's something, that becomes a scarring issue, that you have to see those kinds of things. So being thoughtful about that, and the digital footprint that somebody has left behind, which is a whole new ball game that people never had to think about before.
Right. Well, I have been working with you, Carol, on Future File, and just looking through the software, and I am a software developer, and hopefully I can help become involved in this. But it for me, as for you, it's really not much about the money, and really much more about helping people manage this season of life. And one of the things that I've seen, I saw as I went through it, is like, okay, what are all my social media accounts? What here's how to get into them, and here's what to say, like if I'm incapacitated, and also if I pass away. And I've seen that, like, I've had that experience a couple of times both with professional colleagues and in just like more casual social media. Someone dies and someone's like 3 months later is like
where's
Bob?
So? Yeah.
What happened to Bob? And then that becomes kind of a, like, sometimes people just don't know what happened to Bob. He just disappeared off the face of the earth.
I have a couple of followers like that where I'm like, did something happen to them, or what's the story? Right.
And I think the one that really, really bothers me, I don't know if they fixed this, but LinkedIn has this problem where someone will disappear and it will tell you forever to congratulate them on their work anniversary because they haven't changed jobs.
Which is the weirdest thing to begin with. It's a work anniversary to begin with. That's ridiculous. Nobody should ever be congratulated. Oh, it's been a year. It's like, who cares? Just stop that. But like you said,
Yeah.
and then if somebody were to then go into that and you're congratulating them, and then they have to say, oh, by the way, Bob's been dead for 5 years or something like that. Yeah, it's just it's just super awkward thing. But it's also, people want to know if you have people in your life that you care about, even if they're not in your life every day. It's important, and that person has put out digital content, so like, do you want to archive that? Do you want to get rid of that for their kids? Like, it just being more thoughtful and intentional about that is something people don't really think through. And by the way, in the moments of grief, as I know unfortunately you've been through as well, it's not a real good time to be making those decisions. You're not really in the best state of mind to do that.
But it's funny because I could be another data point for people to look at is the whole like wait a year before you do anything drastic advice is just golden. My dad had a very extensive coin collection, and when he died, our first thought was like, oh well, mom needs money, right? Oh, we got to pay for this, we got to pay for that. Mom needs the money, and my dad had a small life insurance through his work, but quite frankly, that would have handled any of the basic stuff we needed done, and we didn't
like the final expenses.
We very easily could have sat down and had a family discussion about what to do with dad's coins and how to go about selling them, and we didn't. We just sold them bulk, and it's not even that we didn't get as much money as we could have. It's that there was some stuff in there that was more important to him than other stuff.
Yeah.
Right. And if we had sat down and thought through it for 12 to 18 months, we would have been able to make those we'd be able to understand what this meant to him better and what he would have wanted for it.
Or it's just something that you might have wanted or needed and you just didn't realize it because it's so overwhelming and you just want to get it done in that moment. I had that experience. We didn't, when my mom passed away, it was a really bad situation because she was in a marriage that she'd been divorced from my dad, and she was in another marriage, and that guy was bad news. And so my sister and I had it was like supermarket sweep. You had like 5 minutes to go in and take what you wanted.
Right.
And, there was no sort of thought involved. There was no directive, even though she had leukemia and should have, given some thought to it. Although I understand why she didn't want to, which is why you want to do it before you get to that point. But there are things that afterwards, oh, I really wish I had mom's X. And it's just in that moment where I'm just trying to grab whatever I could, wasn't top of mind for me to even look for.
Right. No, there's so much, especially in the wake of grief, there's so much to do that you can get very caught up in doing the things rather than thinking through the process. And I think it's funny because I think there's a human tendency that transcends even this topic. Circling back to COVID, which I'm going to let go in just a second, is that the advice we should have followed when COVID happened was the advice that public health officials put together when we were not in an emergency, in a panicked emergency. That was, in retrospect, way better advice than the advice that they were giving when they were right in the middle of it. And they were like, do something. That's just a natural human tendency overall, is make your plan when you're thinking clearly and not when the great panic or the great emergency hits, because it's very hard to pull all of the ideas and the wisdom together in the spur of a moment.
Yeah, no, it's huge. And it's one of those things that sounds like, oh, I won't need this, but it's the same thing. If your house is burning down, you don't want to have your escape plan at that point in time when you're panicking. And it's funny, the parallels between the future file and the you will own nothing, because it's the same thing that I would say there is that, with the stakes that are changing globally and some of these things that we're talking about, central bank digital currencies and what's happening with the dollar and whatnot, we don't know if, the global financial order changes in 12 months, in 12 years or in 50 years.
Mhm.
But again, you can't be in that scenario and just thinking about, oh, what am I going to do? Hey, they have a central bank currency now. They're shutting off my access. I didn't think through this plan. And so I think that's that idea. It's not being a prepper, but it's being prepared, right? It's having that level of preparation, just like a Boy Scout, to think through these important things for your wealth and for your legacy. And by the way, if you're the one that passes away and you do this for your family, like, this isn't about you. This is about making it easy for them, because you're not going to be there anymore. You don't have to deal with this. But the amount of chaos that goes on for your heirs, like, if you love them, the best legacy that you could possibly leave them is making this very difficult life cycle event as easy as possible. And again, it's not just the passing, it could be aging. We have my father-in-law has dementia. He's in a memory care facility, and there's a lot of stuff that we need to deal with financially and whatnot based on that. It could be, again, that your house is on fire and you want to, grab that file or have that access on your computer to that information because, everything goes up in flames and you need to know how to access this and that and have backup keys and whatnot. So.
And not to get the listeners panicked or anything, but what I'm actually dealing with something like that within my church, where we have a parishioner, and he's been having some memory care problems, or memory problems and dementia problems, and he took a turn for the worse at the moment where his children had just taken a 2-week cruise, and they don't know about any of it because nobody can get in contact with them. And so it's this sort of thing where it's you don't, like, it's everybody's just waiting. They're like, please get back soon, because everything, like, his care is almost entirely on hold. Nobody knows what to do because there's no one who has the authority to make those decisions, and there's no sort of guidance. There's no sort of like, here's person number 1, person number 2, and person number 3. You will be able to get in contact with one of those people.
And then once you get in contact with those people, making sure that they have the proper authorization signed, because that's a whole other thing. Or like you were talking about the life insurance policy, this is one of the areas where it goes awry for people. People think that whatever they leave in the will is what happens. But if you have anything that has a beneficiary designation, like a life insurance policy, that is the default. So if you have an ex-wife that's on the life insurance and your current wife in the will, the ex-wife is getting your life insurance policy. And again, going through these things on your own is really hard, which is why walking you through easily step by step to be able to have these discussions with your family and to make these decisions is I just think, a much more palatable approach to this legacy planning.
Yeah. So the product is called Future File, and it comes in both paper and digital form. And I have no financial stake in this at all at this point. I'm just trying to help out. But you should definitely go check it out. I think it's incredibly worthwhile endeavor. And even, like, the funny thing is, even if you got 50% of the way through it, that's still enormously tough, right?
That's what we say is you take it in chunks. And if you do 50%, 30%, like, they'll be in so much of a better position.
Right. So thank you, Carol. Where can people reach you to find more of what you're doing, writing, saying?
Yeah. So the best place to find me is usually on Twitter. Not anyone can see my tweets, so you might want to turn on notifications or add me to a list to actually find me. I don't know what's going on with Twitter 2.0 right now.
We thought does.
That the suppression issues that were going on for the last couple of years under 1.0 were bad. They're exponentially worse now. So if you can find me, or you just want to look me up, there at Carol J.S. Roth, and then the book, You Will Own Nothing. But actually, the elite want you to own nothing. I want you to own everything, as we've been talking about. So get your physical copy, start with that behavior. And that's, wherever it is you like to find your books. Some people like the Amazon for your convenience. I always plug bookshop.org, which supports small businesses. They fulfill from local independent booksellers, or walk into your community and support a small business. But I'm a capitalist. Wherever you want to buy it is okay by me.
All right. Well, thank you so much, and we'll have to have you on again sometime. See how your book does, and I'm excited. I need to get a copy. I need to read it. but it hits a lot of things that I care very, very deeply about especially in terms of autonomy. So
yeah, well, I appreciate the platform, the work that you do, and excited. Hopefully, as we move forward with more innovation for Future File, we can also bring that back for your audience too.
I think that'd be great. All right, thanks, and we'll see you later.